In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend and I do horror-related things on the internet. Today I'm doing a review of Prom Night. You probably know what Prom Night is, even though I, being a bad horror fan, or at least a bad slasher fan, had not seen this movie until the beginning of this year, when it was in my box set, because I didn't know it existed. Slashers, even the classics, haven't been on my radar for a long time, but now I've seen it. Before I get into the review though, I would like to thank Controller Cramps for doing his subscriber contest. I think it was 350 subs, if maybe it was greater amount, not sure, but I'll put that number in here somewhere, I suppose, if I messed it up. But anyway, congratulations. Thank you for the contest. I'm honored that I won, but I'm even more honored that you liked what me and Amos made for it. With that out of the way, I'm gonna review Prom Night. I forgot to write down what year this thing came out, but I'll put that down there somewhere. It stars Jamie Lee Curtis, who I think had done Halloween shortly before this, and of course that was what really kicked off the whole slasher craze, so naturally people wanted Curtis to be in their movie, and she does a great job in this movie. It really follows that structure of the slasher movie to the letter. It's like what the writer of Friday the 13th said. He was just like, so there's a past evil that's been committed that has set the events into motion, and then years later you put a bunch of teenagers in a spot where they can't get help. They're probably horny as well, and then you kill them off one by one and have one of them survive. And yeah, that's this movie. That shouldn't spoil anything, because that's what slashers tend to do, but I'll get into more spoilers about the specifics of the horror stuff later. But basic premise of this movie is that years and years ago, a bunch of kids were playing some kind of sort of hide-and-seek-ish, tag-ish game in this house called The Killers, and they would be sort of chanting, "The killers are coming, the killers are coming," and one kid would be it, or the killer, and a bunch of others would hide. The kid would look for them and say, "The killer's got you, the killer's got you," and then they'd all sort of group together and find the last kid. This one girl and her little brother are late, and they arrive. The little brother goes off somewhere else, and the little girl goes into the house to see what everybody's doing, and she does not want to play the killer game, but the kids kind of gang up on her, and they're chanting "kill, kill, kill" at her as she sort of backs away to this pretty high up window and falls through it and dies. And one of them wants to run to the police, but Wendy, who is just the worst, tells him, "Do you want to get locked up? Do you want to get taken in by the police? No, we're not going to tell anybody. This is going to be our secret. No one's ever going to know how this happened." That's how it starts off. It gives the movie this very sort of creepy, almost urban legend-y feeling, sort of in between real and not real. It's something that could happen, but it feels like just sort of that creepy story that your friend at school tells you to try and creep you out, usually unsuccessfully. It's a cool way to set up the movie. And of course, with it being prom night, all these teenagers years and years later are getting ready for the prom, and they each receive creepy, whispery, over the phone calls telling them that something's gonna happen on prom night, and most of them just kind of ignore it. We see the tension build to prom night, and then of course the slasher stuff happens. I'll get to that in spoilers. But at the same time, you've got this detective who believes that whoever killed this little girl has come back, killed the teenagers, and doesn't know why doesn't know if it's the killer or if not, who it could possibly be. You've got that plot going on as well, and they all sort of come to a head at the end. It's a fairly good plot. It's actually a really well told story, although generally, despite being a teenager, teen romance, prom-centric stuff doesn't interest me because I don't care, but you've got some just sort of annoying scenes of kids goofing off, which tends to be my problem with a lot of slashers, but the acting's good enough that I suppose it works for me, if not always, most of the time. The soundtrack is suitably creepy, just a nice horror soundtrack. Nothing stand out about it, but good, creepy score. And then, of course, come prom night, you've got all this disco music worked into the soundtrack, and I don't really listen to disco, but it's good. It actually sounds really nice in the movie. It's a well-shot movie. Again, nothing really sort of artsy or eye-catching. Nothing really pops out at you, but that kind of adds to the overall realistic feel that I suppose this movie was trying to go for. Again, acting, Jamie Lee Curtis is Jamie Lee Curtis, so what do you expect? She works really well, and everybody acts really well. They're kind of too generic teenish for my liking, but it's prom night, so I don't know what I would be expecting other than that. And within the confines of these fairly surface-level teenage characters, they bring a lot of good personality into them. Throughout this, you've got little hints as to who the killer might be that you'll see as you go back, and you've got little fake-outs and stuff as well. I'll get to that in the end. It has almost a giallo feel in that sense. Also, a lot of the shots of the killer where you just sort of see their hands really help with that feel as well, because you don't know who it could be. It's not the black-gloved killer of literally every Argento movie, but it has that vibe to it because you can't see who it is that's doing the killing. You've got the heavy-breathing phone calls, which are creepy but kind of cheesy, but I like the sort of creepy, whispery voices thing, even though it's really ridiculous. And I just sort of started wondering to myself, because there's one scene where the killer tries to call one of the folks, but they're leaving, and it just sort of cuts back to the killer impatiently tapping their pencil on the paper, like, when is this guy gonna pick up the phone? And of course he never does because the guy's leaving. It just sort of made me wonder, what if somebody else picks up the phone? Does the killer just ask, can I please speak to this person? Can I please speak to the teenager in this house and not their parents? Just sort of the logistics of how the killer is finding all these people and managing to speak to them doesn't make a lot of sense, but there's big plot holes in a lot of my favorite movies, and this is hardly a huge one. It doesn't detract from the movie at all. It's just sort of kind of nice that things worked out exactly this way. Imagine all the other ways they could have gone. There's one kid in particular, Seymour Crane. He goes by Slick, and he drives around in this car, and he's definitely trying to be this sort of ladies' man kind of guy, and he's very geeky, and he's a bigger guy, but, everybody seems to like him. He's actually got this great charm to him. He's not awkward. He's just very full of himself and very confident, and he's just so left of center for a movie like this that I absolutely love him. The movie didn't have nearly enough of him. Even though it didn't really need him in the movie, he was probably my favorite character in the movie because he was just a lot of fun to watch. On the other side of the spectrum, you have Wendy, who of course grows up and is just as awful. She's just very competitive, trying to get a date to the prom and, have bragging rights and everything, is just this sort of characteristic bullying mean girl type character, and she's to some extent a love to hate character, which becomes a little bit of a problem once the slasher stuff starts happening. I'll get to that in a minute, but overall isn't a problem, and as a matter of fact, you sort of see just sort of her insecurities that are causing her to take this stuff out on others. She's this very insecure, frightened person, and you pity her, but at the same time you're like, yeah, you're still kind of awful to everybody. So amazing characterization, doesn't work in some contexts, at least not as well as it should, but great acting. The detective subplot, while kind of interesting, doesn't add a lot to the movie, except making you think about, ooh, who's the killer going to be? And, you know, in the spoilers, I'll talk about just how much of a red herring the whole police subplot is, because it just isn't there to add much to the story besides telling you a little bit of what went down after that day at this abandoned house and just kind of throwing you off the scent of the actual killer. That's literally it. So it didn't add a lot to the movie, but it didn't detract from it either. So this movie builds tension well, costuming's good. A lot of it's just generic teen clothes, but they do put a lot of thought into what every character's wearing. And, for example, Wendy is, like, never not wearing red. Like, I think maybe she's wearing something else when she's younger, but she's wearing red in every other scene, and it just accentuates her very easily angered, just sort of constantly pissed attitude, and it really helped the movie, I thought. And that's really all I can say before I get into spoilers, besides my overall consensus on the movie, which is it had some flaws, far from my favorite movie, but just a really well-made slasher, straight and to the point about pretty much everything. Has a few pacing problems that I'll get to in the spoilers, but overall, a really effective, good movie. I recommend it. It's a classic. I wish I'd seen it earlier, but I'm glad I've seen it now. And without further ado, spoilers. Once we get to the actual prom night, one of the girls, Kelly, she has this very shy, just sort of perpetually frightened, sad attitude to her, and I just feel so bad to her because she's just pressured into everything. And you've got a scene where she's making out in just sort of this out-of-the-way area in the school, I'm not sure, and her boyfriend or date or what have you wants to take it, you know, quite a few steps further than that, and tries to undress her, and she's like, no, I don't want to do this, and he's just like, what, are you a fairy tale princess or something? If you won't do this with me, I'll find someone else who will, and just leaves her. And just poor Kelly, she just has a hard time through the whole movie. She never gets a break, like, anywhere. And then right after she's abandoned, she's just crying to herself, in comes the killer who cuts her throat, and that's the end of her. The blood effects in the scene are good. I hate to say it, but her just sort of blood spattered corpse has just sort of this sad beauty to it. But, you know, that's what Kelly was. Poor Kelly. Wish she'd gotten a bit more of a break, but that's how horror movies go. That being said, as the killer is coming after people, you hear the whispery voice from the phone coming out of their mask, and it doesn't work because killer's wearing like this like sock hat type, just holes cut out in a sock hat, like generic criminal mask, and you're not going to hear that voice through that mask, and it just does, it works on the phone, but when having the killer running after you and whispering things to you, it just doesn't really work and doesn't make a lot of sense. So that's a gripe with the movie that I had, but it still works other than that. The second kill is also fairly tragic. This is the other girl who is going out with Slick, Seymour Crane, and they're having a very intimate moment in his vehicle. I'm not exactly sure what it was, in the woods, and she's like, I'm never gonna forget this night as long as I live. And as soon as that happens, the back of the vehicle opens and the killer stabs her, and of course that's sad. And then an Invisible Man moment happens where the car takes tumble off the cliff and blows up in an explosion of flame. It's one of the most just sort of bombastic kills in the movie, and it was really well done, but I feel like something a little bit darker was needed, for just a little bit more haunting and dark was needed for these characters we care about a little bit more, which is my main problem with the movie, because one of the very last kills in the movie is Wendy, who you've come to sort of feel a little bad for, but overall just not like at all. And she is in the bathroom, and the killer comes after her, and she runs all through the lower area of the school, just hiding in dark places, and it's very suspenseful and good in that respect, and you just sort of see her have a mental breakdown, and it's really well executed. But I feel like it should have been saved for a character that you were more attached to. That would have made it far more frightening. Because on the one hand, having the bad girl have this sort of breakdown is intriguing and important to watch, but on the other hand, it just doesn't, it feels counterintuitive to have the character you like the least have the most drawn out death scene, because you aren't as attached to that character. So sort of giving the main girl like a more bombastic car explodey type death, and then giving one of the other girls another much more intense death would have made sense. But the way they went with it also works for the plot of the movie, if not to the ultimate effectiveness of its scares. And then you've got the finale where Wendy's boyfriend, who's more or less just kind of this douchey guy who's acting as her flunky in some ways, but just kind of doing whatever the hell he wants, ties up Jamie Lee Curtis's character's date and gives himself the prom king crown. And then right before the curtains open, as the prom king and prom queen are going to be crowned, he gets decapitated by the killer, and his head rolls to the front of the stage, which has this sort of long walkout thingy, and his head rolls to the front of it, and everybody's screaming, and I guess it's the principal is like, don't panic guys, it's going to be okay, when there's literally a severed head of one of the students there, which I find funny. And then somehow the disco music in the room starts up again, and we've got Jamie Lee Curtis and her boyfriend duking it out with the killer on the dance floor, and then eventually killer gets whacked in the head, and you just sort of see this horror and stunnedness come into the killer's eyes, and just sort of this horrible realization wash over Curtis and her boyfriend's face as you see the killer walking outside, and it has flashbacks to the killer game from the movie. You just hear the kids chanting, "The killers are coming, kill, kill," as this person walks outside and sort of falls on the ground, I think gets shot by the police, and we find out that it's the younger brother of the girl who got pushed out the window, and just sort of muttering to himself. I don't remember exactly what he's saying, but it's I like it when these movies can manage to give you an actual sympathetic killer. As much as I like the sort of terrifying facelessness of a Michael Myers, having this pathos within the killer adds a lot of depth to it as a story. If not boosting the horror aspect, it just adds to the movie. That's all I really have to say about Prom Night. It's a good slasher. Not my favorite, but slashers aren't my favorite kind of movie either. It's a really good movie, but not the absolute greatest either. But I highly recommend you watch it. Thank you for checking me out. Hopefully I'll see you in another video sometime. Goodbye.